Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Surge Strength webinar. So excited for all of you that took time out of your day to join us, whether you're live with us. We have a lot of people that registered live, way more than the previous webinar I had with my good friend Mel from Swim a few months ago. So I'll be excited to see how many of you join us live. And then, of course, there's a lot of you that have messaged us saying you just couldn't make it to the live one, and you'll be watching the replay, especially with everybody that we have around the world in our audience. So thank you, those of you that are taking the time out to join us live. If you would, just introduce yourself real quick in the chat and where you're from. I always like to see where we have people joining us from. And we're definitely going to be interacting Q&A at the end. I took out a lot of my slides because I want to go deeper into the teaching, because I think sometimes I cram a lot in. So we'll see how that goes. And also, would love it if you guys could answer this poll here as I launch it. It's always good for me to get an idea of who's out there so I can tailor the presentation as much as possible. Lots of coaches, wow. Well, welcome, coaches. We got like 3/4 of you here in the audience. Awesome. Thank you for everyone that's participating. Always helps to know who I'm talking to. All right. And then let's see here. So like I said, definitely going to have a good bit of time for Q&A at the end to go over questions. So once I get into the presentation, don't really worry about throwing questions in the chat. I'm not going to see them as I'm presenting, but definitely at the end, I've carved off a good chunk of time for that. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Ritter. Was a swimmer for a long time, then a swim coach, strength coach. Now I run Surge Strength. A few years ago, we did the first Dryland certification. And actually, I would really like to see how many of you, this is the first webinar you've been on or not. All right, quite a bit of new people. That's awesome. That's awesome. Welcome again, those of you that have been on one webinar with me before. All right, good bit of new people. That's always awesome. Appreciate the participation as always. All right. And then, so for those of you, because we do have a good bit of new people, the Surge Strength Academy last 2 years or so, that's where the Dryland certification is, and a bunch of free Dryland 101 courses. So if you're new and you haven't checked that out, make sure you do. The 101s are free. We have one for coaches, for swimmers, and for parents specific to your Dryland needs for that. Obviously, be doing a lot of webinars, podcasts, and the blogs on SwimSwam as well. And then I'll tell you guys, we have been so busy the last 2 months or so here at Surge, onboarding not only a bunch of new teams, but individuals for the online Dryland programs that we have. It's awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end. But I'm not surprised, because we just keep getting results, whether it's Olympic gold medals, world records, or kids' first futures cuts, or helping a team get organized with their Dryland. It's fun to do that. But let's jump in now. I think I had actually one more poll. Sorry, guys. Let me get through here. My polls. Yeah, I want to see if anybody who here has not registered yet in the Academy. I want to know that. How many of you have already registered in a webinar, in the Dryland 101 course that we have for free in the Academy? All right, good. So at least more than half of you. Oh, it's getting real close, 50-50. All right. Sounds like a lot of you after the webinar need to sign up for that free Dryland 101 course, whether you're a swimmer, coach, parent, we got one for you. But thanks to all of you that have already done that. That's awesome. And then I had one more poll here before we actually get into the teaching. And this directly relates to my presentation today. So I'm really interested to see the answers here. So I really want all of you to participate. I know a good bit of you have so far, but really I would want everyone to answer this question. Who is core training more important for? If we have to separate it, sprinters, distance, or both. So about half of you have answered the poll. I'm really looking for a lot of you I want to see what you guys think. It's going to help me present and give you as much value here as I can. All right. Thank you, everyone. So both correct. But before I get into it, I want to talk about why here. And I'll actually here, I can share the results with you guys. So 91% of you thought both. That's awesome. But why is it important to both? Because I will admit, as a younger swimmer, and definitely probably as a younger coach still, I would have probably gone more towards sprinters. And it's important for both, but I would say for different reasons. So for sprinters, being able to transfer power through your core, you think about how important the start is and turn, if we're going short course 50 or something like that, those are critical. And so the stronger you are in the middle, that's going to allow you to transfer the force. And you think about the rate of your stroke count in a 50 free, even 100 free, pretty high tempo. So to be able to transfer that, your core is critical. On the other hand, for the distance swimmers, because the race is so much longer, and I'm talking 500 up or even 1,000-mile up, and you have the open water races now that are hours on end, distance swimmers need core strength because they need to make sure they're keeping their position up in the water, because the lower they're riding, right, the more force they have to put out. So if you can engage your core, make sure you're riding higher in the water, that's always going to help. So I'm glad that most of you are on the same page, but it was a little bit of a trick question. I want to see how many people would go distance or sprinters, but definitely it's for both. So, all right, guys, if you can go ahead and hold questions or any other comments in the chat until the end. Like I said, we are going to have time for that. I'm going to get into presentation mode here. All right. So guys took the time to be live. If you could just silence notifications, I'm really going to dive in to the teaching now. And so we're here to talk about core training. So one, I want to talk about what is the core. We're going to define it. We're going to define the characteristics of what makes quality core training. But at the end of the day, we want it to translate into the water, right? It's for swimmers. How do we actually see results in the water? So first, let's talk about swimming and what makes a fast swimmer, or what enables you to be faster. I know we have a lot of new people here, so I want to make sure I'm not going over anything too quickly that maybe some of you returning have seen. But if I boil it down to how can you get faster in the water, I think it comes down to these two big buckets. And you can throw a lot of things in these buckets, but it's the position that you're in the water. That can be either your body line position or your catch position, but also the level of tension that you can not only maintain, but the level of tension you can get to in terms of how much tension you can put out. So we see that in how long can you keep your kick up? Can you keep your elbow up in the catch? Things like that. So I really think that if you think about these two things, whether it's in the dryland training or in the swim training, how can we always be bringing it back to, is it improving an athlete's position in the water, and is it allowing them to keep tension longer? A really simple way to think about this is which is going to go farther if we use equal amount of force to push these two from the edge of the pool, the rubber raft or the kayak. The kayak is clearly going to win every time if we use the same amount of force, but why? And it's because the rigidity that the kayak has and the position in the water. It's riding higher in the water than that rubber raft. And because it's more compact, or not compact, but solid, it's able to transfer that power that we use to push off and carry it, slice through the water. And so this really relates to core training. When we talk about swimmers, what do we want? We want them to be high in the water with position. We want them to have great tension through the catch, through their whole race. And so when you think through the lens of these two things, position and tension, this is what truly makes your dryland program swimming specific, because we can tie it back to, if we enable swimmers to get in better position, if we allow them to have tension longer and at higher levels, they will be faster swimmers. So keep thinking about this is how you're grading your program, if it's swimming specific enough. And if you've been on any webinar before, this is one of the main slides we talk about, just to make sure everyone's on the same page here, that movement is our first priority in Dryland. Then we build strength on top of that. And once you have a base of strength, we can then start to specialize power, endurance, whatever combination of athlete that you're working with is going to be best for their event. Now, with the core training, I was kind of thinking about this. I think it actually rides the line between movement and strength. Because if we have a really weak core, you have athletes that have a really weak core, that's going to inhibit their movement, whether they're on land or in the water, in terms of what they're able to do. And then obviously, if they have a weak core, they're probably not going to be able to hold a bridge for a long time or transfer a lot of force through their body. And so they are going to be weak as well. But it was just interesting to me as I was preparing this webinar, I think it really does straddle that line between movement and strength when we're just talking about core training. And at the end of the day, though, anytime we can get athletes stronger, or you yourself can get stronger as a swimmer, you're going to be more resilient. That's going to enable you to have better practices more consistently, being able to train harder, whatever type of training program you do in or out of the water. Having a stronger athlete is going to make that program yield better results. And strength is the main way that we're going to enable that athlete to develop tension, to hold tension, to keep their catch where it needs to be through the duration of the race, to keep their kick up the whole time, not just in the closing 25 yards, but from the start of the race. So let's actually break down core a little bit more. And there's still a lot of thought that people just think, it's just that 6-pack, it's that 8-pack there, but it's much more than just the abs. Now, I'm not going to go too anatomy deep on you here. I don't know how many of you majored in biology or done many dissections. We're not going to go that far deep, but I just want you to take a look at the diagram here of all the muscles you could define as quote unquote core muscles. And look how involved this is. Look at the breadth of the body that it takes. You talk about something like the erector spinae, goes all the way up to really kind of mid-neck there, mid-lower neck, and all the way down to the hips, the glutes, even a little bit of the hamstring area below the hips. So just appreciate how large of an area that quote unquote core muscles cover in the body. And then it's really not just that 6 or 8-pack, but 360, and how deep some of these muscles are. You look at like something like the psoas or the iliacus, it's really deep and embedded there. Here's another picture that really illustrates the layers. And if you think about it like as an onion, how many layers it has, that's really your core. It's layer upon layer. So we're not just talking about if we want to improve core strength for a swimmer, it's just one muscle we need to work on or a couple movements. There's a lot of stuff we have to take into account, from the posterior side of the body, the back side, the front side, the sides, all the way through. And then how deep are we going? And typically, the deeper the muscles, the harder it is, or the more concentrated force, time under tension that is needed, because they're so much more postural muscles in terms of they're looking at long endurance to be able to just hold the posture. And typically the more superficial muscles are a little bit more where you're going to get your quick bursts, your power, your fast twitch. That's a very generalization to make with the muscles. Now, I know we had a lot of coaches on here, about 75% of your coaches. Now, it's okay if a lot of your swimmers are looking like this, where, it's not the worst bridge in the world. And before I go too much farther using bridge, I define a bridge as where you're on the forearms, plank, you're in that push-up position with hands. If I had to choose, I would rather be in the bridge position most of the time, because if we're in the bridge position, we've now taken out one joint that they can compensate. So now it's really only the shoulder. Elbow isn't playing that much of a factor when you're in a bridge. Whereas if you're in that plank push-up position, now I have the wrist to worry about, elbow and shoulder. So there's a lot more ways that athletes can compensate and kind of hide and get out of the exercise, so to speak, and not have it benefit them as much. So all that to say, though, if a lot of your athletes look like this top athlete when they do a bridge, that's okay. It's not the worst bridge in the world, but there are definitely things that we can do. And you see it's getting better each level of the picture down there. And so I'm going to tell you how we can help move the swimmers from that top picture down more closer to that middle and bottom picture. And this is the thing I want you to think about in your mind, especially as coaches, and to show your athletes. And if you're a swimmer, be thinking about this. When you're going up and down the pool, you want to be much more like that kayak than the rubber raft. Now, as we start to define core training, at Surge Strength, we break down the movements that we do in Dryland into 5 distinct categories. Pull, push, hinge, squat, and brace is how we define movements that involve the core and core training. And the reason that we call it that is because in swimming, that's mainly the action that we're asking the core muscles to do, is to brace. There's not actually a ton of movement. A lot of the contractions that swimmers need from their core are isometric in nature, or even anti-rotation, having a platform to build off of. And we'll flesh that idea out a little bit more if that's the first time you're hearing something like that. But I just wanted to show you, we really think about core training maybe a little bit differently than you've thought about in the past. And we start with how we name it and how we think about it. And this is so that we can really keep in mind we're helping swimmers get faster in the water by building better athletes on land. And the brace really embodies that. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So in the brace, we have 3 positions that the athlete can be in when we're doing movements involving core training. So prone, you're going to be in that bridge position. You're facing the ground. Supine is where you're flipped over, you're facing the sky, you're on your back, and vertical is in that standing position. And this is really important to think just in very general terms of your core training, or when you're doing brace movements, that you need to have some of each. If you're just doing core training always in the prone position, you remember all the pictures I just showed you of the deep layers of the core musculature. Well, you're missing out on the supine position or the vertical position. You really need to think about training the core and brace movements in a 3D manner. And so it's important to make sure that when you are programming out your core training, you have some movements from each of these positions. So the athlete's going to be in the prone position, sometimes supine, vertical, and even within the same workout, it's important to make sure that we're sprinkling in from all those different positions that the athlete can be in. Now, types of movements, a lot of it is going to be non-moving or anti-rotation. So the non-moving ones are pretty simple, right? The bridges, the planks. When we're doing rollouts, like with a wheel or stability ball, there's a little bit of a movement. And even the get up, there's a lot of different intricacies in the get up there. You could see that the picture of the athlete, she's right there in that half get up position where she could go all the way up to a full standing get up, or go back down and just keep practicing the half get ups. But a lot of the core movement, so to speak, are that anti-rotation term that I talked about earlier. And what that means is you want to think about the core really bracing as the foundation to then have movement off of. If we go back to that rubber raft, right? Have you ever tried to stand up, whether it's in a rubber raft or a boat, something on the water? It's really wobbly, right? That's what it's like if you're an athlete or you coach athletes that have weak core, is there's not really a stable foundation that then you can throw from. So think if you're on a boat and you're trying to throw a baseball as far as you can, but the foundation is wobbly underneath you. There's no way you're throwing that as far as if you were on solid ground and had a solid platform to create force from. So at the end of the day, for swimmers to get the most out of it, really think about core training, brace movements as building that foundation that then they can have their catch, their power. They can have the power from the legs that they're generating with the kick. That's going to be much more effective because there's a solid foundation to move from. So the anti-rotation thing is a real big deal. And think about the core as the foundation that other movement is from. So it's not how powerful can they do sit-ups or even how many sit-ups, because that's not practicing what type of movement and demand is going to be asked of that musculature in an actual swim race. So here's some other things to think about too, as we're talking about the overview of core training and brace movements in particular. You always want to make sure you're engaged in your core, even while breathing. I know on some previous webinars, I've talked about being able to be tight, and I'm punching myself right now in the stomach here and still talking. So this is how you can teach your athletes in just a real simple way to brace, make sure there's a strong foundation here. And then can you still breathe? And then the next level would be, can you do that while talking? And if you think about it that way, you have to activate 360. So it's much more than crunches. And I've kind of gone over that enough at this point, but it's about laying that foundation for the kinetic force that the swimmer is trying to produce in the water to get from one side of the pool to the other as fast as they can. Now, technique, even though it may not be a lot of complex movements, especially compared to a movement like a hinge category or a squat category, lots of other things to think about. There's still a good bit of technique that you need to be coaching when it comes to brace movements. So these are the two main ones that you always want to keep top of mind. Is one, and I've really tried to scrape my mind if there's ever a core movement where this is not the case, and I'm really having a hard time. So it's 99% brace movements. You want a solid line from the hips, I would say all the way up to the neck. And if that line is breaking at any point, that's probably something you could coach and say, all right, athlete, or if you're coaching yourself, think about staying tight from the hips all the way up to the neck. And that means you also need to keep tension. That goes back to the previous point of being able to breathe while keeping tension in your midsection. So those are two key things to always be reinforcing when you're either doing workout by yourself, coaching yourself through your head, or if you're working with athletes. So the alignment, we've already showed these pictures before, but this really points out the alignment. And you can see here, that top swimmer really sagging at the hips, not a lot of engagement there. A lot of that is just relying on the upper shoulders and the musculature to keep her up. She's really not engaging from the middle. Whereas that middle picture, she's doing a pretty good job. I can tell that she's engaged. A real simple way to test that on the bridge is you could just kind of push a little bit with a fist into the hip and see how much are they allowed to sway. And I'm not talking about an overwhelming amount of force, right? You could easily push a swimmer off from that position, but just a little bit there. And that will help the athletes realize, oh, this is how I have to engage to not let my hips move if I'm in that position. And obviously the last one, it's a really hard movement. I've worked with Olympians even that couldn't get that far out. So that's not necessarily the end goal, but with years of training, we can definitely get an athlete to being able to do a stand-up, complete rollout, touch the nose to the ground, and keep that tight line throughout. So alignment's a big deal, especially when we're in that bridge or plank position. Also, in this position, and this is typically, again, bridge or plank position, is winging. Now, with swimmers especially, they're really going to be prone to this just because the nature of the sport. They're on their phones, they got their rounded shoulders. You're really probably going to have a lot of winging. Now, you're not going to be able to fix this overnight, but you still need to just be aware of it as much as you can. Coach the swimmers, even helping them feel like, what does that feel like, my shoulder blade? Sometimes a lot of swimmers don't even know what that feels like and what their shoulder blade is doing. So even just lightly tapping the shoulder blade and letting them pinch that together a little bit more to prevent the winging is going to be helpful. And then it's going to allow more of the focus to be on the core musculature rather than the shoulders holding them up, especially in this bridge and plank position. Also, building on that, this is one that is really easy to fall into this trap of, if you have a wheel or a dumbbell or something else that you're using in a bracing movement, to focus too much on the extremity. What's my hand doing? How's it holding the weight? Or what's the wheel doing? And thinking about the arms and the shoulder, that because they're closer to the wheel. You really have to always focus on hips to neck. Think about what that's doing, how that's feeling during the exercise, because that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to light up this musculature. I could care less what my forearm or bicep or tricep is getting out of a Turkish getup, even if it is a heavy weight, because I'm thinking about what can I do to light up the core musculature. So those are the three technique mistakes that I see a lot that I would really encourage you, whether you're coaching yourself or coaching athletes, to keep top of mind as you're doing core training. Here's some coaching cues that you can give either yourself, if you're coaching yourself, or to your athletes. And this is really good when they're in the moment, right? When they're doing a rollout, when they're doing a bridge. Tell them, be stiff as steel, right? Brace as if someone was going to punch you in the gut. Stay tall like a tree. This kind of language is going to help the athletes connect more. And the more they can think about it, they're going to generate more neural connections and wake up some musculature, especially these weaker athletes that don't have a very strong core. That's part of the battle, is for them to think actively, engage those neurons. And now we start to have more muscles fire. Now we're already building core strength and we haven't even finished the workout yet. So a lot of it can be neural, especially if we're talking more at the beginner level. Now, again, we're very swimming focused, obviously, when we're talking about core training. And this part of swimming history, I think, is really unique as it applies to core training. So the supersuit era, for those of you that don't remember off the top of your head, but a lot of you are coaches, so I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. 2007 or so, 2009, every single world record was broken at least once during this era. And it was when we had the arenas, we had the jackets, we had all these suits that were pretty much acting as like wetsuits. They were so thick. It was so hard to get on. It took forever, right? You had the plastic bags, get through it, make sure it wasn't going to rip. And it was incredible to watch all the records fall. And I remember at the time thinking, and a lot of coaches, this was the thought too, right? When are these records ever going to get broken? This is so far out. When are these ever going to change? Well, when you start to deconstruct why did this happen, the supersuits basically gave a cheat code or enhanced an athlete's already natural ability or trained ability, combination of that. It raised their level of buoyancy and it enabled them to have better compression. Now, if you think back to the picture of the rubber raft and the kayak, you could see how that easily, not that world-class athletes were more on the kayak stage, but even if they were, or more on the rubber raft, but even if they were already a kayak, the supersuit enhanced it even more. And so if we think about what enabled all these world records to fall already, I think there's actually a case that we could do this on a much more natural level, because we saw the results in the swimming that it just changed overnight. World records started falling. And so it's not that they changed training entirely. They got a cheat code. They got a little shortcut there that we can do if you program core training. So swimming, because it's in that buoyant, non-gravity environment, it really can expose your weaknesses in your core. And so that's why it's so important to focus on this as a regular part of your dryland training. I've really seen it time and time again, whether it's with the teams we work with or individuals, you can really build up your core so that you have a real quote unquote natural supersuit, and you can get the advantages that we saw from the supersuit era, but you never have to worry about putting anything on or taking anything off. You are building that into your training, and that's where you can see a lot of these results transfer into the water. So let's see how we actually do that then. Let's go through the steps of how you would build up the brace capacity for someone when we're talking about these core movements. So you see I highlighted here, circled the 3 different types of movements that we've already talked about, right? The prone, where you're facing down, supine, where you're facing up, and vertical. You want to make sure that you have exercises for each of these categories. Try in every workout to have one of each. And you can see here, especially if you've gone through our certification course, how we break out in each of the 5 movement categories. We break the exercises further into levels. So level 1 is much more beginner. Level 3 is pretty advanced. I'm not so much worried about what level you're coaching your athletes on, but in the bracing category, I'm really concerned that you have 1 or 2 exercises from each of those subcategories in every workout. And you can always check out our YouTube page for more of these exercise videos. So as we're talking about building up the brace, here's a real simple progression that you guys should all make sure you're taking screenshots from or write this down in your notes. Here's the slide, right, of the presentation to make sure you get down. So with the bridge progression, I'm sure your athletes are probably going to fall into one of these 3 stages. And what I would suggest is really just focus on using this routine and get them to progress through it. So you want to start with 4 rounds, build up to, if you can go 6 straight rounds, and pick where you think your athletes should best start off. I want them to get all the way through at least 4 rounds, and the goal would be to eventually get through 6 rounds. So the first one, that's a real beginner, right? Only holding a bridge for 10 seconds with good alignment, and then you get to rest for 30. So huge in terms of rest ratio compared to the work ratio. And that's what you want for someone that's more beginner, not as strong in their core. Kind of the middle level would be, all right, 20 seconds on and 10 seconds rest. So now it's double the work compared to rest ratio. And then lastly, a pretty advanced athlete is going to be able to do 50-second holds, 10-second rest, and then on and on again for at least 4 rounds, building up to 6. If all you did was to just start to implement a routine like this, you're going to see improvement, because when you simplify it, especially for younger athletes and even older athletes that maybe aren't trying to really dive into their dryland training, I want to simplify the actual program that we're giving and just really coach it well. Make sure they're figuring out, how do I stay engaged and breathe and maybe even talk while I'm doing this, making sure you're thinking about those 3 levels of alignment that we saw earlier, moving your swimmers down so that they're holding their alignment better and better, even if it's only for 10 seconds. If you can coach an athlete to hold their alignment better for that 10 seconds they did yesterday, that's improvement. And over time, you keep building it, and the compounding results you're going to see in the water. What I will really try to drill into your head when it comes to programming the core is frequency is far more important than duration. So what do I mean by that? Let's just say we're doing the phase 3, right? They did the third step there where it's 50 seconds on, 10 seconds off. So it's a minute per round. 6 minutes is how long it takes us to get through that if they can go 6 rounds. It's not very long, right? But that's much more effective to do 6 rounds, get 6 minutes, and do that, let's say 5 or 6 times a week. So that's 30, 36 minutes. Then do it once or even twice a week over and over and over again for 30 minutes. The frequency is much more important in terms of getting results from your core training than the actual session duration. So I know sometimes, especially coaches, it's easy to just kind of, if we have 5 minutes before practice or 5 minutes after, just start sneaking this in a little bit, even if it's just on deck before they jump in the water. And that's a great way to enhance a swimmer's warm up too. You think about if we're lighting everything up in their core before they jump in the cold water, that's going to help them warm up quicker and be ready to do a main set type performance earlier in the workout. So it doesn't take very long, nor should it. So get out of your mind if it has to be, 15, 20, 30 minutes of abs before practice. It can really be 10 minutes or less if you're doing focused work, working on the techniques that we talked about earlier in terms of coaching cues and things like that for your athletes. But frequency is much more important than duration when it comes to core training. Now let's actually break down some more exercise. So I already showed you kind of a basic progression that I would go through with a prone bridge. And again, you can always go to YouTube, look up a video, I'll coach you through that. But let's coach you through live some of my 5 best accessory exercises that I could simply just add on 1 or 2 of these exercises to that routine. And now we're still under 10 minutes probably, and we've done a really good core session. So stir the pot is the first one. So SB, stability ball. In this one, you can see it's still a bridge, but now we're adding that element of instability just a little bit, and it's going to cause those muscles to have to fire a little bit more to keep stabilized. So a coaching cue you could give your athletes or yourself is keep your back flat like you're a table and you don't want to spill the dinner, right? You don't want glasses to go everywhere. So keeping that still while you're just going little rotations. Doesn't have to be very big movements. And even just 5 reps one direction, 5 reps the other is going to be really good for that. Okay. So the next one here, kneeling rollout. Now this is good because we have a little bit of difference in these 2 athletes. So the girl here, you can see just a little bit at the end, she's dropping a little bit at the hip. So this is not bad by any means. A lot of athletes probably couldn't do a rollout this good, but those are the little things that if you can identify as a coach or you're training yourself, this is the little things where you're going to get improvement over time. As much as you can in the kneeling rollout, you want to be tall from that neck area that we already talked about down to the hips. And it's a little awkward because you're on your knees, you're trying to figure out where the hips fall. But as soon as you can get tall and long there, the better it's going to be. And obviously reaching out far, but not so far. So for the female here, I would tell her, don't go out quite as far. Stop right there. So have them stop right before they're going to lose that tension and that line that they have. Then over time, maybe the next day or in a week or 2, ask her to go just an inch further and then just a little bit more. So if you see a little bit of compensation like that, the first thing I would do is just shorten the range of motion that they're doing a little bit. Okay. The bridge drag, this is SB. This means sandbag. So SB, the initials can mean either stability ball or sandbag. You kind of need to use your common sense for the exercise, but this is a really great one. We talked about earlier, the anti-rotation concept, right? Of your core staying tight. And the first exercise that I showed you, the stir the pot, very much the same thing, where as the athlete is doing this, you want their back and hips to stay as flat and as little side to side movement as possible. There's going to be a little movement. This is probably right on the border of, we want it to be a little bit tighter, but it's pretty little movement in terms of what you're going to see a lot of your athletes do that are weaker in the core. And The sandbag doesn't have to be that heavy. It could be as little as 5, 10 pounds, even 20 pounds is still fairly lightweight. I've had athletes that have been able to get up to 50 or 60 pounds pulling the sandbag through. You think about the musculature it takes, not only just right from the arm and shoulder to pull 50 or 60 pounds across, but the anti-rotation concept that we talked about earlier, where the hips aren't swinging around, you're not moving side to side. That's where we get swimming specific, because we are showing the athlete how to produce force from a flat platform with the extremities. That's exactly what swimming is. How do I keep this flat, close to the surface of the water and as still as possible so I can move my arms and legs as much as possible to get through the water? This is a great exercise to do. And I would say well worth it just to get some sandbags just to do this type of exercise. Here's another one that requires some equipment, a TRX. So you obviously probably need a pull-up bar or something anchored to the wall to do this. And this is a seductive exercise in terms of it doesn't really look that challenging, but when you coach it well, and when you make sure your athletes are getting as much movement as they can back and forth and keeping hips to neck really tight, just like stir the pot, just like the bridge drag, this exercise is really good to feel. What does it feel like when I'm swimming? That's the type of engagement they should have in their core. So even just have your athletes, if you have TRXs, on the deck. I know a lot of teams will put the pull-up bars, right on deck. If you have that ability, just have them do a couple body saws back and forth before they get in the water, or even between sets to help remind them, this is how I need to feel engaged when I'm going up and down the pool. And coaches, I'm sure you can relate to this. Swimmers, they're thinking about a lot of things, right? Sometimes it's not on what we want them to, but if you can help them feel that, it's easier for them to recall that when they're in practice, rather than having to think through something you explain to them. This one's another exercise, doesn't look too hard, but it's really a foundational core movement and training that I would have you do. It's called the hollow. So it's kind of the opposite of the bridge, right? We're in the supine position. And what you want to do is just create enough tension where it's just a little bit of a curve, right? So the hips are still on the ground, but I don't want the arms or the feet that high up. I'm not trying to do a V up or opposite V up, anything like that. I just want to have a little bit of tension and just raise the feet and hands off the ground slightly. And there's other progressions than we can do off of the hollow once you get the hollow down. But the hollow is a really good one. I see a lot of coaches and swimmers doing the bridges all day, but I rarely see hollows even half at the ratio of that. And if we go back to the 3D training, prone, supine, vertical, the movements and the positions that the athletes are in, this is a great balance to doing bridges. And so especially if your athletes are ever complaining about their shoulders in that bridge or plank position, make sure you're throwing in some more hollows to help with that. Now, we've talked about progression a little bit and where some of your swimmers may fall into, or where you may fall into with where to start with some of those combos. I've showed you some of my other favorite core exercises. Now let's talk about how you can actually test your core strength and to see improvement over time. A really simple test. It's only going to take 2.5 minutes here. The video is going to accelerate it just so we can get through it. But you're in that bridge position. You're going to start the time and you're going to have the athlete go for 1 minute, just 1 minute, just holding the bridge. Then after a minute, they're going to raise a foot just an inch off the ground. They do that for 15 seconds. Then the other foot for 15 seconds. So we're at 1.5 minutes now. Then they're going to go an arm out. You see, just a little bit of movement, but we're trying to not have that. Then the other arm. Now 15 seconds each. We're at 2 minutes. The final 30 seconds, you raise arm, opposite foot, arm, opposite foot for the other 15. That gets us to 2.5 minutes. So the goal is for yourself or all your athletes to get all the way through 2.5 minutes with as good a form as possible, especially when we start moving, the arms, the legs, and the opposite arm and leg. It's really going to be challenging. And this is from our Dryland certification curriculum, when we break down the entire movement assessment and performance tests that we take swimmers and teams through. But this is the standards here for this particular test. So level 1 is if they didn't make it to a minute. And so that athlete's probably going to need to do that 10-second on, 30-second off rotation that we talked about earlier with the bridges and going through 4 to 6 rounds. Level 2, they're greater. They held it for greater than a minute, but once you started moving arms and legs, they fell apart at some point. They didn't make it through all the way to the end. That athlete could probably start at that 20-second on, 10-second off range. And level 3, that's if they made it through the whole 2.5 minutes with good form. So it's not like their hips are really sagging at the bottom or they had to roll all the way over to the side, when they were going the opposite. They're probably in that category that they could go that 50 seconds on, 10 seconds off. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of an idea of where you could see your athletes falling into. It's a real simple test, 2.5 minutes max. And then you're really going to get a good idea of what's the appropriate level to challenge either yourself or your athletes. And that's the key too. There's no magic exercise out there. The magic is really in matching what's the most appropriate exercise for this athlete's current ability, their movement, their strength, all these other things that they have to deal with today. What's going to best fit that? Not what exercise may be good for them 10 years from now, because that's going to overwhelm them and likely lead to injury. Now, a lot of you coaches may say, well, I'm only at level 1 or 2. I've had a lot of successful swimmers still only be at level 1 or 2, but of course the goal is over time to progress them. So it's not about where you are today, but you should know where you are today. So then you can have your programming relate to that, because over time, we want our swimmers to move from that rubber raft to much more of a kayak, to be slicing through the water, to use their core, to be that platform that they're going to express power and strength from in the arms and legs as they're going through the water. So I'm going to take a quick drink of water. I would love for you now to put into the chat what popped out to you the most today. What did you learn? Or maybe even if it reinforced, this is where I would really like your guys' feedback of what was valuable for you today in that lesson. Was it some of the coaching techniques? Was it some of the progressions we went through? Was it more helpful when I went through specific individual exercise? Because I'm really trying to make sure these webinars are well worth your time. So give me feedback in the chat there of what was most helpful today. All right, guys, I'm actually going to pull the chat up. Appreciate all your feedback here. All right, so Robert liked the variety and progressions. Some new keywords. What were some of the new words, David? I would love to know. Yeah, James, maintaining a more holistic view. Absolutely. All right. All right, guys, my dad appreciated the specific exercises. That's good. All right, Brittany, appropriate levels of exercises. Yeah. All right, the accessory exercise. So a lot of that. So I'll make sure I'm having a lot of videos too, because we're going to go through some of the other categories as well. All right. Awesome feedback, guys. Glad it was so helpful. All right. So now, let's see if I can get. So now the idea is a lot of new ideas or maybe some reconfirming. Now, what do you do from here, right? So you learn some information, but if we just close the computer, you go run practice like you normally did, we're not really making much change. So at this point, you really have 3 options. You can do nothing, you can go out alone, or you can let us at Surge Strength help you. And a lot of you have already not done a real easy thing of signing up for the free Dryland 101 courses. Like I said, the last month or so, we've been onboarding a ton of teams and individuals. And this was a great podcast. You should, if you haven't subscribed to our Surge Strength podcast, go subscribe. And the last or the second to last episode we've done, the most recent one, Maddie came on and talked about how she was really feeling burned out of swimming. And she's a rising junior, I believe, off the top of my head, and really just had a bad short course meet a year plus ago at this point, trained with us for about a year. And a year later, achieves her first futures cut. And not only that, more importantly, she is loving swimming now and has a renewed passion for the sport. So excited to swim in college now. That's the kind of change Dryland can have. Here's a college swimmer we've worked with that broke multiple school records after not having a lifetime best for years. And here he's doing a single leg deadlift exercise, and that's about 155 pounds there. That really helped his breaststroke. So he was only taking 4 strokes a lap then in short course yards because he had such a powerful kick. Then we got master swimmers, right? The guy in the middle there, he went from not being able to do any pull-ups, guys. He could only just slowly lower himself off the bar to two so years later, he was doing 3 pull-ups to his chest, bar to the chest with 55 pounds attached around his waist, ended up placing second in the world to some former Olympians in world masters meet, broke a ton of records. And then we even have much older master swimmers, guys in the picture here turning 72, and their goal is to break world records when they're in their 90s. That's awesome. So we work with all types of athletes at Surge Strength and teams as well. So you can find out more information on our website and click a button to fill out a quick form and get a call with me. I'll talk you through more of the options and the programs that we have. What I'm really excited about to announce, though, we've never done anything like this before, is we now are going to have Dryland plans in the Surge Strength Academy. So I want to explain the difference. So the programs, that's where we create a completely customized Dryland program for you. And we've had a lot of interest in that. And I know a lot of you just don't have the budget to necessarily afford that right now. So we wanted to have an alternative to that. And it's not going to be nearly as customized, obviously, because it's not an ongoing relationship. But this Dryland plan that I've put together, it's about 75% done. We're going to officially open it in the next week or two. What this is going to do is allows you to not only test where you are with your core. I'm going to walk you through how to do that, but then what does that do to your training? And I'm going to give you different tracks to go down based off your score. So I'm going to lay out exactly what you should be doing in your core training on a regular basis. That includes how many times a week, what exercise should you do? And we're even going to have different options based on the equipment that you have. So, this is all the things I already told you guys. So yeah, core test, we're going to talk through the core training and more importantly, the multiple routines. So no matter what type of equipment you have, you'll be able to do this. Even if you have no equipment, we have the Dryland training plan for just body weight only. You're going to get access to videos and me coaching you through all of the exercises as well in this Dryland plan. So like I said, we have a track of core training that's just body weight only, so no equipment is required. Then we have a track of programming for kettlebell dumbbell combination, anything like that, TRX pull-up bar. So if you have those three equipment, there's a track for you. And then the sandbag and stability ball, there's another track of Dryland training for just core. So we're just talking about core exercises only for this Dryland plan. But this is really where you can transfer all the hard work in your core training. And again, it doesn't have to be very long sessions, 5, 10, 20 minutes. That's all you need. But as long as you're doing it consistently, and more importantly, you know how to progress. And that's what I'm going to break down for you in the Dryland plan. So what we're doing is, like I said, it's 75% done. I'm aiming for in the next week, 10 days to release it. It's very close. Is we're letting you get early access. So if you go to surgestrength.com/core, it's at a discounted price right now. So if you pay today, you'll lock in the discount. And then as soon as it's done, like I said, 75% done next week or so, you'll get an email that the course is now open for the Dryland plan for core training, and then you'll get access to it. But once it's done, the price is going to go up. So this way you can lock in not necessarily early access, but the early price on it. So always like to tell people what we offer and then make sure you understand who's this probably not for if you're feeling any of this. So if you're still just kicking the tires on this Dryland thing, not really sure about it, I would highly recommend the Dryland 101. Start there. It's a free course. Check it out if you're still just kind of kicking the tires on the Dryland thing. If you're seeking magic results, I would be charging a lot more if I could do magic for you in Dryland. So probably somewhere else to be looking if you're looking for magic results. And if you're not interested in learning, I doubt you made it through the webinar this long, so I don't think this applies to many of you. But guys, we've been doing this a long time now. We have seen results time and time again from different types of individual swimmers, teams, clubs, universities. We worked with them all, even Olympic gold medalists. How much Cullen was able to do in the pool at the 2008 Olympics on that world record relay where Lizette came from behind. We saw that change and that improvement in Dryland the year leading up to it. I really wasn't that surprised, honestly, because I saw what he was doing on a regular basis. And Mark Gangloff was in that same group now, who's now doing incredible things, turning that program around at UNC, and they're already getting results. I think he's only been there 2 or 3 years. They're just taking off like a rocket ship, that program. But he really challenged me on my Dryland training because he was a very cerebral athlete that wanted to know why we were doing everything. So I always need to have not just an answer for Mark, but a really good answer that he could buy into. So that's what's really built the foundation of surge strength over time, that now I'm not surprised when we have results like Maddie's, where she was sick of swimming, ready to quit. And a year later, she has her first futures cut, is on fire. This is the power that Dryland can have. Or even Ernie and Bernie celebrating their 72nd birthday by doing 72 pull-ups. Who does that at 72 years old? And now they're thinking about world records in the 90 plus age group category. So that's my pitches on where you can go after this webinar. But like I said, I wanted to make sure we carved out a good bit of time for Q&A. So you have about 10 minutes left here. So throw in your questions. Now, make sure you throw them in the chat. It's much easier for me to keep track of them that way. So please put any questions in the chat, and I'll stick around here for the next 10 minutes or so, or until questions stop. And I'll actually put this link in right here in the chat real fast, so that you guys can easily. So here's the link in the chat, guys, if you want to check out the core training Dryland program that I'm finishing up here. And then if you still needed this too, as just kind of where to go, if you're looking for programs on the website, everything starts on the website, but programs or academy. But yeah, feel free to drop in questions there. So Robert, the 101, so the academy is where all of the courses are. It's technically the subdomain of the website. We could get technical here, but yes, start on the website. There's a button you could just click register, and then you just select which 101 best applies to you, whether you're a coach, swimmer, or parent, and then you just get instant access there. Yeah, we're going to be sending out a replay of the webinar later, only to those that registered. So the discount is going to last until the course goes live. So the next week or so, and then the discount will be gone. And it'll be regular price going forward, Bonnie. Jamie, how often per week do you recommend doing this core program? Jamie, that's a whole lesson where I talk about all the different variables of that and how I would think through that. But I will say my general answer for anything Dryland training is 2 is a minimum. Like you're just maintaining. 3 is optimal, but core, if we're just talking about core training, there's some other nuances. So I have a whole couple lessons dedicated to that in the Dryland plan. So, lots of questions now, guys. All right, I got to scroll back up. All these questions are coming in while I'm answering questions. Bear with me while I get back to where I was. All right, Jonathan, what percentage of time in strength programs should be core work versus push, pull, hinge, squat? Great question, Jonathan. So I am of, or surge strength, we think about every Dryland session for the most part. If you at least give me 30 minutes, I want to hit all 5 of those movement categories. Now, I will say with core training, why it's a little bit different is of all the other movements, there's not a lot of ratios per se that we have to worry about, like with hinge, squat, push, pull. There's definitely ratios we want to worry about, right, when we're doing the Dryland training. Core training, the only ratios you really have to think about are you doing prone, vertical, and supine, and making sure you're getting some exercise from all 3 of those. I have rarely, if ever, seen core training be done too much, as long as the technique is good. And so that's why there's some nuance to it, and why I break that down in a few of the lessons. And especially if you only have like 10, 15 minutes, I would just probably do a core function session where we're focusing on, maybe it's shoulder mobility and a couple core exercises, some bracing movements. But there is some nuance in if we're just talking about core training, and that's why I have a few lessons to break down the frequency of that. But great question, Jonathan. James, all right, keep the questions coming, guys. I'm working my way down through them. James, at what age or development stage would you recommend athletes move from bodyweight exercises to light weights? James, excellent question. I have a whole lesson in the Surge Strength Academy talking about this, but the short answer is you need athletes to be able to answer, or you need to be able to answer yes about your athletes to 2 questions before you start moving from bodyweight to lightweight or any type of external resistance. That could be medicine balls, bands, anything like that. Are they excited about that? Would this be something they're interested in? Because if you don't have their interest, you're never going to be able to coach them, and then technique and injuries come into play. The second question you need to answer yes to is, Are they coachable? Are they going to listen? So I know it sounds like kind of dumb or simple questions, but if you don't have yes to those, your group isn't ready. And actually, it was last week or the week before in the Dryland mentorship. So we get together once a month and we do Zoom calls, and they just ask a bunch of questions, and we just sit around and talk about Dryland for a half hour. So one of the questions about how do I move my group forward in this new way that they're doing Dryland with the stuff we're teaching at Surge Strength. And one coach, Guy, actually, he chimed in that it took him 4 years to really move his group that was at the time, they were like 9, 10-year-olds, I think, if I'm remembering right. Now they're 13, 14, and they're completely bought in. So sometimes it may not take, a few weeks or a few months, it may take a season or two to really have that change and for your athletes to buy in. So on the one hand, as a coach, you really need to have patience, but you also need to make sure you're following an actual plan and program it out. And so that's something that the Dryland training or the Dryland plan that we created here, the core training, that will actually be perfect to help you and to think through, all right, athletes, we're here and we're going to get here. When you can explain it to them and they start to see it, that's really going to help. Oh, someone said they can't see the link anymore, so I'm throwing it in the chat again, guys. Oh, sorry, I didn't need to put it to everyone. Now I'll drop the link in. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so let's go back up. So many questions. This is awesome. Keep them coming. I'm working my way through them, guys. All right. Joanna. All right. My daughter is 11 years old. Is there a program for her age? Yes, Joanna. So we actually, 11, 12 is pretty much the starting age that we will onboard kids for our programs. We can get into more details on the call, and I'll ask some more questions just to make sure it is a right fit, because we have turned people away in the past that it's just not going to work with the kid if they're young, and we can give other options of what to do now with that. All right, Brittany, thanks for putting this on. I have to hop off. All right, thanks, Brittany. Keep the questions coming, guys. Working my way through them here. All right, Barbara, how much time per day for steady improvement? So Barbara, going back to it, I wouldn't think about time as much as the frequency in the week. So remember, those 3 simple progressions I showed you, like 50 seconds on, 10 seconds off, or even 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Going through those 4 to 6 rounds, we're looking at 5 to 10 minutes. And so even that can have improvement if you're doing it every single day. And then after a few weeks, if you're just doing that, we need to add in some more exercise. That's where the accessory exercises come in, or the other routines that I've put together in the core training program. So it really does not take that long as you know what you're doing with technique. You're improving your technique every session by some of the tips I showed you and what I go into more in depth in the core training Dryland plan, but it doesn't take that long. You just need to know where you're putting your time and effort, and the frequency. I just can't say that enough. Frequency is so important in that. I would much rather you doing this 4 or 5 times a week than once or twice for double or even triple the time. Robert said, perfect. Looking forward to this program. I know the swimmers are looking forward to change up their current grind. That's awesome, Robert. All right. Bill said, thanks. Appreciate it, Bill. Liberty, does the Dryland training cover injury prevention and recovery? So in our custom programs, we absolutely build that in. In this core training, the Dryland plan. So the Dryland plans we're probably working on half a dozen of them right now. The first one we're releasing is the core training. So what I'm trying to do is pick the most popular topics that I've seen a lot of questions and interest in, and core training was the obvious place to start here. I believe the next one that we're doing after this, off the top of my head, I think it's either shoulder health. Yeah, shoulder health for swimmers. So that's the next one. So Liberty, that's the next one we'll be coming out with, the Dryland plan about shoulder health and all the different things that encompass that, from mobility, flexibility, strengthening exercises, even other things like posture and things that we can really make sure we're doing that. So the core training is, even though we're approaching it to not have injuries, how we do it, it's not probably as injury focused as you're thinking of the next Dryland plan that we come out with, the shoulder health one. That'll be very much centered on injury prevention for the shoulders. But with the customized programs that we do, that's always top of mind, is making sure don't have injuries first. All right, guys, it's 2:00. I'll keep getting through some of these questions. So if you have 1 or 2 more, we'll get through them. All right. Luis's question, not sure if you can answer my question. My one leg cannot straighten as much as the other. Long story. Do I need to be worried about the unequal tension that is likely to transpire as a result? Can I just do my best and stop when it starts hurting? Am I risking serious injury? So first off, anytime with pain, Louisa, I would make sure that you have seen like a physical therapist, chiropractor, doctor, somebody that is checked off that, that's okay. So that's the first rule. I never comment on pain and making sure if you go through it. Discomfort, that's another thing. We talk about that in terms of the certification about what the difference between pain and discomfort. Discomfort, it's burning. It's not feeling good. Pain is a very sharp, sudden thing. So anytime you're dealing with pain, make sure we approach with caution. So with that caveat, let's say it's discomfort. If it's discomfort, I would just keep trying to lengthen how long you can maintain that and make sure you're having good technique. So I'm trying to imagine, like if you're in a bridge, if you had one leg that's slightly longer, if you're tilting. So just make sure I would think about things like that as you're coaching through. But really, if it's true pain, go and make sure that you have the okay from a medical provider to check that out. And if they give you the okay, then I would default back to my answer of hopefully it's more discomfort that we're dealing with and just kind of work through that. Bill asked, when are growth plates fully developed? It depends, Bill, but I dive into that a lot in the certification. And what we have found over the years working with, pretty young kids, again, 11, 12, 13, some kids we worked with for years now, they're going off to college, is if we have a slow bake process where we're slow cooking this over time, long-term development, and a planned progression, we've really had no issues with that. No injuries, no severe setbacks, stuff like that. Paul asked, what's included in the certification? So Paul, you can go to our website and I'll actually drop in the link here, certification, and it shows you everything that's there. We only open up open enrollment a couple times a year. We just had this past one a month or so ago in April, I believe. And the next one we're looking at is the fall. But yeah, we've had hundreds of coaches now from, at this point, I think it might be 30 plus countries represented that have gone and gotten Dryland certified through Surge Strength. All right, guys, we're going to work through these couple questions here. William, Bill, kneeling roll on ab wheel, shoulder swimmers with shoulder issues, stay away from doing these particular exercises. So Bill, that's a great point about the extremities. So remember, that was one of the technique things I was talking about, where if the kids are focusing too much on the extremities, I have found that kids with weaker shoulders or shoulder immobilities, this is going to start talking to you. And I don't want the shoulder talking to me when we're doing core exercise. I want the core. I want you to have some burning, some discomfort here. So with that, this is where you would help with some mobility exercise, some shoulder functioning exercise to raise the ability of their shoulders. And those exercises are at a higher level usually. So the kneeling rollout, with the ab wheel, off the top of my head, I think it's a level 2 exercise. So we would probably focus on just level 1 exercises because we're not going to have the issues with that. And then I would hope that the shoulder mobility and function gets elevated. Then we can go to level 2 and 3 exercise. So it's all about the progression and bringing them along slowly. There's never a quote unquote universal bad or good exercise. It's really about where the athlete's at, what are their capabilities? And then sometimes it's at the appropriate, and that's where you get good results. And if it's over their head, that's where injuries happen. And if it's under them, they're underwhelmed and they're not going to get anything out of it. And that's where you probably have not as engaged athletes in your sessions. All right, Robert asks, shoulder health is such an issue we come across with most 15, 16-year-old boys. When will that seminar be available? So Robert, what we're going to do is, I don't remember the date off the top of my head. I think it's in 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to have another webinar where I'm going to be talking about that. And at that point, we should have that Dryland plan pretty much done as well. So as long as you're on our email list, we'll put out an article on SwimSim. You'll let us know. All right, guys, I think that's all the questions. Thanks so much. I hope to see you on the next webinar. Bill, I'm glad you appreciate it. Joanna, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate all of you staying on through the Q&A, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.